Good evening all, welcome. First up I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal elders, the traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet, and thank them for allowing us to walk upon their lands. Without much further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the gentleman from Canberra City, no that's not right.
Canberra Town Planning.
Canberra Town Planning, I nearly got it, I tried to say Canberra City Town Planning.
Close enough.
Canberra Town Planning and the Soho development on Northbourne, previously known as Dixon on Northbourne, to tell you about what they're up to, and they have a little presentation which I'll get my big nuggin head out of the road and let you view.
Thank you, Dennis, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brett Smith. I'm here on behalf of Art Group, the proponents for the subject site, as Dennis said, formerly known as Dixon on Northbourne, so the site that is bordered effectively by, excuse me, Morford Street to the north, Northbourne Avenue to the west, Doring Street around to the eastern side, and the Pavilion Hotel to the south of the site. The land was bought at auction in August last year, and we're in a process of working up the estate development plan and the first stage development application for the site. So tonight we're just here to give you a bit of an understanding about where we're at in the process, some time frames that we're talking about, I suppose some of the key elements to the proposal, and more than happy to take questions. Probably best to hold them to the end if we can, unless there's something burning on the way through. We'll start with this is our development intentions plan. We have consulted with this reasonably broadly. We've been out to a few community consultations and public presentations that we held at the Pavilion, the last one being just last Wednesday night, and we presented to the council at a closed forum earlier in the year. The context in which the planning is being run is a relatively unique one, in that we're a little bit, I suppose, ahead of some of the policy and aspirational changes that the Territory are currently proposing, and that brings with it a number of complexities about how we put the proposal together, particularly in regards to stakeholder engagement. So we're at the moment working through the Office of the Coordinator General, which is a little bit of a different way to go about things, and we're consulting pretty broadly with all of the Territory departments ad nauseum, and also the NCA. So what we'll show you tonight has been through that process for the past 6 months or so, and now sort of culminating in a proposal that we're busily putting together to try and get that in somewhere around the end of next month, the end of June. So the end of June we want to put in a state development plan and the first stage development application, which is at the southern end of the site, and of course that will run its usual process and be available for public comment through that process. You can see there's 5 P stages set up in there. They're essentially just precincts. So we're calling it precinct 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The way that the development intentions plan works from a conceptual perspective is that there are a number of leases, so there'll be individual leases. The current site is held under a single holding lease and a deed of agreement back to the Territory, so we've got some obligations to deliver some infrastructure, some public connections and pedestrian access, and privatised road network inside the site. So just to give you a bit of a feel for how that works, Northbourne is running up that yellow spine there. You can see where the light rail network will be constructed in time. Doring Street out to the rear, and this is currently Karua Street, and Karua Street runs through the centre of that precinct 5. That is being de-gazetted by the Territory, so that the land comes effectively without any infrastructure needed to be retained. I'm sure you'll be aware that there are a number of heritage elements that are being retained under a conservation management plan within the site. The first one, which is the 4-storey bachelor flats up on almost at Morford Street there, which you can see currently in existence, sits out there behind the hoarding, relatively in isolation. So that's being maintained. The masonettes, the three-storey masonettes fronting Northbourne, which are all still there at the moment, so they're currently sitting all the way down here. The visitor centre sits in the middle there, which stays there until last. And then we've got 4 garden flats at the back, so that those lighter coloured elements there are being maintained as heritage samples or representative samples of the former stock that was in existence over the whole site. In terms of staging, how we're working this, the first block settles up the top here, which is June this year. The next block settles with the territory down to the south, which is June 18, and then June 19 for the visitor centre, reasons being that's been maintained as a site office while they deliver the light rail, as I'm sure you're aware. That said, we're proposing to put in our first DA on the southern end. A little bit out of settlement sequence, but we'll do that with some territory support in terms of running the process, although we won't have a lease on it until middle of next year. We intend to deliver that one first because we're planning, and we're going to show you a little bit more information on that one in just a moment, but it essentially sets up with the majority of amenity opportunities so that we can produce something that we think is going to help sustain and support not only the development itself, but the local community in terms of retail opportunities and some of those sorts of uses. The concept master plan or the development intentions plan shows each of those leases in a different scenario of uses. Some of those are not currently consistent with the planning objectives of the territory plan, although we are working with the territory under their aspirational redevelopment of the corridor to look at some of those use changes. So, for example, P1 is set up as a predominantly residential opportunity. P2, at the moment, we're currently looking at the opportunity for independent living or retirement living. P3 is currently configured there in envelope as a commercial office building, which is not consistent with the uses of that CZ5 zoning. P4 is an opportunity for hotel, and that is subject to some further discussions with Heritage ACT and the Heritage Council, particularly about how that integrates with the existing heritage elements. And P5, which we'll go into a little bit more detail in a moment, which is a retail ground opportunity with residential above. The way that the site is accessed is through a rear privatised driveway. There is a set down drop off that runs off Northbourne, so a left in off Northbourne and a left out. We've got an obligation to provide an active travel network, so a lot of work to go in the verge there about putting in opportunities for people to walk, cycle and move their way from Morford all the way down to Wakefield. So that's an obligation on us under our deed. Some detail on that is still sketchy because the territory haven't provided us with, I suppose, the design scope of works that have to currently go in there. All we know is we've got to put in something in the order of about a 3 metre wide path right down that verge.
That's on the Northbourne side or on the
Northbourne side, yeah. Yeah, so the full length from Morford all the way down to Wakefield. There's actually no access off Northbourne to our precinct 4 or 5. It all sort of drains back out in front of P3, and that's all of the access on and off Northbourne, with the exception of some service vehicle type arrangements that we'll show you a little bit more in the southern end of precinct 5. The majority of traffic is dealt with in Doring Street. And that's something that's been mandated to us by the territory. They are trying to take all of the traffic off Northbourne and put it into the rear streets. So that will happen. There is the opportunity for a left in off Northbourne, just to the north of precinct 4 there, should we be able to get a drop-off zone for a hotel type use. Other than that, pedestrian permeability and connectivity, which is a requirement under our deed, so bringing people from the eastern part of Dixon across the site and connecting with the light rail corridor. I'm sure those of you who have looked into the recent announcements of where the stops are will realise that there's one essentially where the motor registry is currently, or where the bus interchange is going in, and another one down at MacArthur Avenue or Wakefield down on Northbourne. There is the provision for, so we're told by Canberra Metro, a potential light rail stop should density require and should the activation require on just out in front of P2 there. So that's essentially how that sets up. The State Development Plan, for those of you who haven't seen one circulated or haven't had the opportunity to comment on one, is largely the technical aspects of the site, servicing it, dealing with all the infrastructure that needs to go in, all the stuff that goes back to the utility providers, the asset managers and the like. So it's largely dealing with infrastructure and services. You'll see some blocks cut up into those 5 precincts, and some access and egress arrangements. That's where all the traffic reporting will come in. So we're busy modelling traffic at the moment to have a look at what the impacts are on the local network, and we're working with TCCS pretty significantly with that one in terms of what that's going to do to some of those local intersections.
Who's doing the traffic modelling?
SMEC are doing our traffic model.
Thanks.
Yeah. This is just a use map, effectively, which goes into just highlighting those different colours for those different uses, which is what I just went through on that development intentions plan. So I won't go through too much more detail on that. But that's essentially how the estate is set up, and effectively hasn't changed significantly over the past 6 to 8 months of consultation. We're now moving to Precinct 5. Which is that southern end. Now, just to confuse you a little bit, we've reorientated it for best fit on page. So Northbourne is now at the top of page. And Doring Street is at the bottom of the page. You can see on the far left of page is where we've got our service and access arrangements, primarily through from Doring Street to Northbourne, and that's dealing with retail delivery vehicles, waste management and those sorts of things. So to the left of page is the Pavilion Hotel. Through the right-hand side of the page here, ghosted out, which is not subject or not part of this development application, but we're showing for context in any case, is the Heritage Precinct. So the 6 3-storey masonettes and the 4 garden flats out the back. And you can see just in the centre here, that's the proposed envelope for a hotel, but as I suggested before, completely subject to acceptance and direction by Heritage ACT, because it's got some curtilage incursion or some encroachment to deal with there. This is a ground floor plan of the retail network. So all of the blue spaces there are retail tenancies. What you can see up in the top left corner is a 1,000 square metre space with some back of house arrangements there in dark grey. And that is set up for a mini major effectively, so a convenience type store. And we're currently assessing interest in that sort of space at the moment, which would be essentially an anchor tenancy. Through the centre here is an open pedestrian plaza, completely publicly accessible. Something that we intend to install some significant communal or public art. We're currently working on what that looks like. With a crust of retail opportunity around it for cafes, restaurants, those types of uses. Into the centre here, which is an internalised retail mall, if you like, with a glass atrium roof to let in natural light, and some of those internal retail spaces which we think will complement those sorts of convenience arrangements for what we currently encourage health food stores and those sorts of tenants. Services and back of house to the bottom left of screen, currently setting up waste management rooms, which will all be dealt with from the basement up internally and collected maybe a couple of times a week. We're currently talking with TCCS and ACT No Waste about how that's going to function. You can see right next to that is the basement car park access and egress. So all vehicles to this building are coming down Doring Street and into and out of that ramp. That's a pretty significant sort of ramp. There are 3 basement levels. I don't have those for you tonight. They're currently work in progress. But effectively a first level that deals with all the commercial and retail visitation and residential visitors, and then 2 full levels of basement parking for residents below that. The yield is currently looking circa 300 residential apartments, predominantly 2-bedroom, with excellent and some 3s. This is level 1, working its way up, so you can see that active podium through the centre. The building is set up such that it's effectively what we call single loaded, or it's set up like a donut. So all of the apartments on the larger building, and you can see that there are 3 individual buildings, one larger one to the southern end of the site, and 2 smaller boutique buildings further to the north around that central courtyard, or that thoroughfare, the plaza. So some circulation space through the centre of that building, so all of those apartments facing out, either east or west. And as we move our way up the building, you can see that there's a couple of joins through the centre, effectively 4 cores in the larger one, a single core in each of the smaller ones, setting those up so that they're all the way through to the basement and accessible via residential lobbies that come off this plaza for pedestrian visitors. That's where we get up to the top, and we're setting back to Doring Street, moving our way up to 25 metres along the Northbourne side, and we're consulting with the NCA about how all of that sets up. And then, as you can see, we're diminishing over those last 2 and 3 levels with the interface to Doring. And at the moment, we're, depending on where you measure it from, somewhere between 18 odd metres along the back side there. 10 metre setbacks to Northbourne, which is a requirement under the deed, and that is a heavily landscaped zone that's effectively mandated by the NCA. And a generous setback, I can't recall the setback to Doring, maybe 6 to the boundary at the tightest point, and then as it concaves back in, it obviously gets set back even further. So we're currently at the moment working on integration of levels through Doring Street. As you know, it works from a high point, sort of around where the basement ramp is, down to a lower point as we move through that heritage precinct, which is causing us a couple of issues around servicing, particularly stormwater management, and getting some of those shared services down the Doring verge, and what that does to the existing network and how we manage vegetation and verge replanting, etc. So that's effectively how Precinct 5 is setting up. As I said, we're moving through coordination of that with all of our services consultants, and our landscape architect is yet to get a start, but they'll be working on that central plaza arrangement. So just to recap on the timing, we're looking to put that DA in somewhere around the end of next month. We're running the design and siting development application for Precinct 5 concurrently with the estate development plan. So that'll be circulated through all the agencies by the deed manager, and this one will be assessed excuse me, independently by EPSDD and with their agency endorsements. So that's about all I really have to say, but I'm sure there'd be a couple of questions around, and I'd be more than happy to take them.
Yeah, how high is it going to be?
25 metres to Northbourne, which is the cap along Northbourne, depicted in the National Capital Plan by the NCA.
So that's about 3 stories.
No, it's
It's
a retail plus 7.
Yeah, it could be 9, but we're at 8.
You're at 8 stories,
8
so
stories.
that's pretty tall. So how are you going to go overshadowing all, when that westerly sun comes in, you're going to be overshadowing right across Doring Street, aren't you?
No, and we'll have to demonstrate that is the case when we put our shadow diagrams together. The way shadows are necessarily calculated. There are requirements in the territory plan about how we calculate those. But once you get into
Isn't a shadow a shadow?
it is how you're supposed to calculate them to be compliant. Is my point. Once the sun gets around to the west and it is setting, then the one-storey building is going to cast a long shadow.
Yeah, but
It's graduated down from Northbourne and steps its way down to 6 stories towards the rear.
and so how many residential houses have you got on the other side of Doring Street?
It's a good question. I haven't counted them, but there's
Quite a lot.
There's a few, yeah.
So quite a lot. So they're all going to get overshadowed, pretty much like all the folks in Oliver Street over in Lynham got overshadowed.
Well, not at 3 p.m. they won't be.
Well, they get a pretty severe overshadowing. It's pretty terrible, really, if you go and have a look.
Well, we'll have to demonstrate that through our DA, and you'll get a chance to comment on that, as will all of those residents.
It will be a significant impact on the housing in Doring Street. Not necessarily the overshadowing, but particularly the traffic. That's the experience we've had in Forbes Street in Turner, where there are some big buildings that went back where originally there were
Just houses, yeah.
two-storey, exactly, houses. And it's a similar sized road to Doring Street. One, the smallest size.
So the
road.
residential amenity of the people on the east side of Doring Street is going to be fairly screwed.
There's no recoiling from the fact that Doring Street is going to be a vast change from where it is today. That is something that we've tried to discuss with the Territory. The Territory are creating policy that is effectively trying to turn the residential streets into more of an active travel network, their words, and turn Northbourne Avenue into I suppose, an uninterrupted boulevard of light rail, pedestrian, cycle traffic and through traffic. So that's a policy decision in which we're working the same as you'll be commenting. You're more than free to have your comments back to that proposition, but that's where we're being effectively mandated to put out traffic.
I just had a quick question. I'm not sure if you covered this because I had to leave the room, but on the diagram of the units, it looks like you had a small sliver on the north side of each unit. Is that a design feature that intended to go up one? Or either way.
This one.
Yeah, either one. It seems as if you've got on the outside of the building, you've got a small sliver on the.
They're balconies.
Right. Oh, that's going down the side of in between each unit. Is that right?
Sorry, these ones?
Yeah, the vertical.
Oh,
slits.
Look, there's a couple of different plan options that would explain that, but it's effectively to get light into bedrooms, so that's creating the opportunity to make that happen and get those to work as 2 bedrooms with a single frontage.
I was hoping you could talk about the solar access. So the minimum 70%, what's the performance on this? I'm counting 5 fully north-facing units.
Yeah, the way that it's set up and the angular arrangement of the east and west side is to maximise solar orientation so that we can get most of those units will get their 3 hours of solar access to the living rooms on the 21st of June between 9 and 3.
So in relation to the requirement for 70%, what's the percentage that...
Well,
Full compliance.
we're aiming to be to well exceed the 70%.
We find with developments like this, rather than, if you put your long frontage north, then half the units get great sun and the other half of the units get no sun at all. So the best way that we find to do it, and the way that the corridor sites are being developed is they're quite long with their main frontages facing east and west. So in this context, what we normally do with these buildings is to provide frontages that are either east or west facing, which generally means if you're on the east, you'll get your 3 to 4 hours in the morning, and if you're on the south, you'll get it. You're on the west, you'll get it after lunch. You'll get your sun. And what that also means, it minimises the impact in terms of solar shadow being cast through that critical period between 9 and 3. Sure, you'll get solar shadows being cast after 3 and after 9, and before 9, but that sort of crucial period, which solar quality is assessed under the territory plan, which is between 9 and 3. It's about maximising the opportunity for all residents within the development to get a maximum amount of sun that they can.
With the ratios in relation to the bedrooms, so what do you, I may have missed it, in terms of car parks to bedroom ratios, what are you trying to achieve? If it's a 2-bedroom with 2 car spaces, or?
No, it's we've got 1 car for 1 and 2 bedrooms,
Right.
and 2 cars for 3 bedrooms.
Which ends up as how many total project?
That's a good question. There is about 170 odd for the commercial and visitor spaces, so that's the first level, and we're at 450 odd or something like that for residential parking.
Yep.
As spaces?
As spaces.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I thought you had to have 1.5 car spaces for 2 bedrooms.
This is where we're currently working in, I suppose, a little ahead of the policy or the aspirational policy direction. So we're talking with ESPDD about what policy they're trying to aspire to along the corridor, and they're looking to reduce parking,
So
which
you'll
is
hope they'll
reducing
reduce
traffic
that requirement
effectively.
by the time you put that in.
Well, we're reasonably confident that they will. We've been having those discussions, so we're looking like probably maybe even exceed where they're going to end up.
Do you have studies in any of those, or are you planning to have other rooms that might be called studies or something else?
Oh, there are a couple there. You can see the 1+. They're a 1+ study.
So they still only have the 1 bedroom.
They would only have 1 car, but they would have 1 car if they were 2 bedrooms as well.
What's the size of the shops? What square meterage do you have?
They're all circa or just under 100 square metres. The current territory plan mandates that we can't have tenancies larger than 100 square metres, with the exception of that one larger tenancy that sits within a space in the old cadastre that breaks it up, that we can do that. But the rest of it, these are all circa 100 square metres or slightly
It's
smaller.
all eateries that you're going for, or is it retail? What are you looking for?
Well, again, this is an issue with the territory plan. The territory plan says that we can only have 2 uses, pick your 2, and that's all you can have. So it's a little nonsensical, and I think probably an unintended consequence that needs to be addressed. And again, talking with these PDD about how they set up their strategic direction on the corridor to try and effectively
Direct public?
well, put something in there that's going to be of more use. I mean, if we sell the first one to an office, a small office, and someone else to a cafe, you've got sort of 20 offices and all cafes, and that's it. So it doesn't make any sense. So at the moment, they're set up in such a way that they are compliant, and we can do a DA. But what we will try to do in the time that goes to market, or at the time it's delivered, is have that anomaly corrected in the territory plan, so that there can be an array of uses in there commensurate with more of an activation of the space and communal benefit.
When are they looking to go on the market?
Those usually with tenancies, you don't with commercial tenancies, they don't go out as early as the residential stuff, because people usually like to forecast their business into something that's going to be almost turnkey ready. So they won't be on the market for a couple of years, I wouldn't think.
With the residential development, do you have any idea of what proportion will actually be lived in, or what might be left as vacant by foreign investors?
I have no idea. I couldn't answer that.
It's a question.
They've got no control over who buys them.
It's still a question.
Is it possible to see the deed of sale?
I'm not sure, to be fair. It was certainly publicly available for any interested parties that wanted to have a look at the site. The deed of agreement is something that is yet to be executed, so that will be a fair bit of detail to be dealt with in the next few weeks, but it certainly isn't executed at this stage.
Is there any chance of actually widening Dooring Street?
That's something that is not dealt with in the deed. It is probably going to be a discussion that will be had once the traffic report is available and we start showing some of the impacts on the local network. In terms of widening, obviously there are constraints with the boundaries on either side, and they're pretty significant constraints.
Yes.
We do understand that the minor collector classification of the road is likely to be increased to potentially a major collector, which triggers a number of requirements, including on road parking and cycling lanes and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Those things wouldn't be able to be covered without compulsory acquisition of half a Doring Street to start to widen the road reserve.
Yeah.
So these are things that we've discussed with the Territory again at length, and we did try pretty tirelessly to try and get traffic on and off Northbourne, because we thought that was probably a little bit more of an amenity preservation into Doring Street, and we were just rejected at every turn. So even to the extent that we had to fight just to get an address, access lane, road, a slip lane, whatever you want to call it, off Northbourne, which has been a bone of contention for the Territory.
That's been the experience in Forbes Street and Turner, but all the big buildings on Northbourne Avenue that originally went onto Northbourne Avenue are now got 30, up to 300 flats on the one side. Now just load into that small side street.
Yeah.
The parking is on both sides. It's something that the Territory hasn't addressed properly, because there's so many visitors to the buildings along there as well.
And daytime parkers and whatever.
Yeah. And it's likely that Doring Street itself on the other side will end up being high density as well. The housing along there will end up being, there'll be the 8 or
Well, why would you want to live in
apartments per
Doring
block.
Street as a family home? That would be. Why would you want your kids playing out in Doring Street? Playing cricket or something.
No, it's changing. It's going to change the character of the street, but the street won't cope with it that well.
Yeah, there are a number of questions that we raised, and as I said, once the traffic report is finalised, I suggest that it will probably show a number, or highlight a number of those deficiencies, particularly in the local network. How they are then addressed is something that I can't stand
Have you
here with
done
any honesty and tell you that how it's going to work.
Have the residents in Doring Street been advised of this in writing?
Advised of
The
what?
development. Have you advised the residents opposite?
Yes, so we've letterbox dropped all of those areas and invited them to come in and have a look at this through our 3 community consultations that we've run, and we haven't seen a whole lot of people turn up, although we have had some direct discussion with a number of people that actually neighbour or adjoin the property. And look, I wouldn't think that there'd be too many out there that haven't had the opportunity to see that the site's been put into the market, and it's obvious that it's going to have a bit of a change.
When did you do that? The letterbox drop. When did
We've
you
done that on.
Well, we've done for some 3 nights. There was two opportunities in
Because I haven't
December.
seen it yet.
Well, I'll give you my details. If you want to contact me afterwards, and I'll be interested to understand where you live, because we've letterbox
We're on
dropped over.
Doring Street.
Well, we've letterbox dropped over 600 dwellings in and all around the site 3 times up to now. I can give you copies of the postcards.
So is this the master plan drawing? I was just curious, why are there 3 blocks that are residential on Doring Street where it meets up with P3 and P4? Why are those shown as vacant blocks when there are houses there?
Oh, it's purely what would have been lifted off ACMAP I and what was available on there. There's no intended consequences to any of those blocks. It's purely a site map, and for whatever reason they would have been covered in trees or something like that, so they just didn't show up.
Someone mentioned, I think it was, sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Neil Parsons.
Sorry, Neil. That this drawing indicates what would be allowable under the current Territory plan. So there's been a rezoning of all those residential areas anyway to enable them to go to 3 and 4 stories. So this actually is a drawing, and it's not meant to, obviously, anyone here who has a house in there, it's not meant to say your house is going to get demolished or anything like that. It's really just saying that under the Territory plan, this is the scale of development that's allowed. We're not proposing to do anything that would require a Territory plan variation or anything like that. What we're doing is within the current legislative requirements. The real challenge for us as a design team is to do it in a way which marries the balance between what the territory is looking for with the outcomes along Northbourne, but at the same time being responsible in terms of doing a development both for our client and the community in the area.
We've also had a discussion with the strategic planning team about the interface, particularly along the eastern boundary and what those residents set up as, and suggested to them that we would be happy to integrate some planning ideas, at least from an urban planning sense, about what opportunities those residents might have that might effectively give them some benefit or some development opportunity or some uplift in the value of their land, so that they can potentially have a choice about how they deal with something essentially on their back fence. Because I think that we all recognise that a rear fence to an existing RZ4 and 1 and 2 story homes on that boundary is potentially a little inappropriate, although we've met some opposition with the Territory about looking at how that might integrate, because they're purely focused on the Northbourne side.
Could I ask P2, because that we live just behind that, how are they going to get trucks and that into that area?
Good question. As I said, there's essentially a two-way road system, a privatised road system, laneway if you want to call it that runs between the boundary and the buildings.
Okay.
Now those buildings, I should say, are purely conceptual. There is no design work that suggests that that's what they will or won't look like.
No, because I'd heard that they were going to sort of buy the homes and demolish them to make way for trucks and things to go into it.
No, certainly not part of our development team. Yeah. No, we've got to manage everything completely within the boundaries.
Thank you.
I think somebody mentioned that Q3 wasn't consistent with the codes as they are.
It doesn't worry me because
The use doesn't allow. Well, that's circa 10,000 square metre of office, and that's inconsistent with the territory plan in terms of size. So that would have to be something that would be changed. That would effectively be one of the last stages, so a good few years down the track. If the territory changes its idea about how they want to look at a true mixed use precinct, then that's an option. If that doesn't eventuate, then returning that to a residential consideration is pretty simple.
So it's currently an occupied office, is it? And
it's currently a conceptual office.
Oh, I see.
So the use of office is limited, but the territory plan, Brett spoke earlier about 2 uses of 100 square metres, that will apply on that.
So we could put in 100 offices on the site, but we can't put in a 10,000 square metre office building.
Some crazy things in there.
Yeah.
Last question.
I just wanted to make a comment. Quite often represented sort of with concrete rectangles, and it does look like the plans, well, I'm no sort of expert in architecture, but it does look like the plans that you've done for at least the P5 does look relatively interesting. So.
Well, you would have seen the media release from the Chief Minister's Office today talking about the Urban Renewal Authority and how that's going to be set up, and how they're proposing to have effectively a board structure and a chairman that will have a design review committee, which is going to be, I suppose, a pretty significant step forward from what they currently call the Major Project Review Group.
Yep.
And they're talking about bringing in people from the NCA side, from the territory side, and effectively critiquing the architecture along the corridor to try and maintain excellence.
In a veto or an advisory capacity?
It sounds like a steering capacity from what discussions we've had in a preliminary sense. They're very much interested in being part of the design process. How that functions and how that works is yet to be seen, but that's definitely what they were talking about.
Well, can I talk about the trees? What's going to happen? There's quite a few trees along that area too, if I remember rightly. So they're all going to be chopped down, I presume?
That's a complex question. The trees through the heritage curtilages are something that is still a work in progress, because there's some contention about what was originally planted with the buildings and what wasn't in the 60s. So that's a work in progress at the moment. The likelihood of verge trees being retained is purely subject to how the utilities are augmented, and if they have to be basically pulled up and relayed, then it creates all sorts of issues for the trees. If they have to come out, we'd have to put them back, including Doring Street and Northbourne. Most of the trees on the sites, though, you're right, would go.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dennis.
Yes, yes.
Thank you for consulting at this reasonably early stage.
Yeah, you're most welcome.
Okay, and that was very interesting.
Well, I should just add, we do have a consultation website that all of this stuff is posted on. So if anyone wants to go there, you're free to make comments on that. We will include that in our consultation report. And obviously through the usual processes of circulation for DAs, which we've got an opportunity to talk through that.
Oh, no, that's right. Yeah, I think it'll be on the website.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
It's a strange looking picture. Well,
We might leave you alone.
thank you.
Thanks, Dennis.
Okay, next up, we have a very interesting young lady. I hope she doesn't mind me calling her a young lady. Kate Sevenovsky, who is Executive Director of Northside Community Services, in whose wonderful building we are meeting, who's going to tell us a little bit about what they do, their associated things like the men's shed, and some other tricky little bits. And she has no presentation, just her beautiful self.
Oh, thanks.
Jesus. So welcome, Kate.
Yes, thank you. So,
Go
do I have to, because there's a camera and...
Yes, yes.
Okay, it's all right.
I'm having a bit of trouble with the visuals anyway,
that's
so
fine,
you're
okay,
you're
that's all right.
being recorded but not visually.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And I think I met Dennis at the consultation or one of the presentations for the Canberra winery sort of redevelopment on the other side of Northbourne. So it was there that we had a good chat. Welcome to Northside. I think you guys have been having the meetings here for quite a while. So Northside Community Service is the regional community service for the Inner North, and we have been for the last 41 years. On any given week, we have about 1,000 Inner North community members coming in and out of our facilities or using our early education centres, around 3 of which are in the Inner North and one's in Gungahlin. And we have around 600 people that are accessing our community services on a weekly basis. So we provide in-home support services for people over the age of 65 that are less mobile than they used to be or need a little bit of assistance, as well as individuals under 65 that just need a little bit of help to remain independent living in their properties. So some of the work that we have been doing that may have gone unnoticed, that isn't in the usual scope of community services, has been the tenant relocation project that we've been working in partnership with Housing ACT. And that would be because of our long-standing relationship with the tenants and families that live in the public housing complexes that are being demolished to make way for redevelopment and the new buildings coming through. We are the lead partner that has been leading tenant engagement in each of those public housing complexes as the schedule of demolition happens. So what that means is that our team on the ground go in with Housing ACT very early on and work with tenants to make sure that they are respectfully and appropriately informed and have their preferences for where they'd like to live to wherever possible adhere to. And then we not only support them in the relocation process but make sure they're settled into their new suburbs and new areas respectfully with the support that they need. Sometimes that may mean that they, for an older person that has services that they really have valued over the years, means that those services will travel with them. So if they had a home support worker, we'll make sure that that worker goes to Gungahlin or to, if possible, down to Tuggeranong if that's where someone's relocated. And in other instances, it's just about connecting people to community. So a number of the tenants have been moved within the inner north because this is their community and has been for years and years and years, and some people have been moved out. But we're particularly proud of that project because I think despite different media and different press that comes out, it's probably been one of the most valuable and respectful processes that I've been involved in as a community services professional for 20 years. The outcomes, if you get an opportunity to read some of the case studies or see some of the interviews with tenants that have been affected, they're pretty moving and very, very worthwhile taking your time to have a look at. A couple of one of the other projects that Northside is a key partner in is the Common Ground project. So Common Ground is building out in Gungahlin, and it's based on a housing first model. And I think, Dennis, that you've been speaking about Common Ground maybe at previous meetings and the possibility of different locations, one of which that's been bandied around has been the inner north. So Common Ground is a housing first model where you combine people that are paying affordable housing rent, so low income earners, with people that have experienced chronic homelessness, and you create a building that creates a vibrant community with services that are located on the bottom to make sure that everything works well. It started in New York, and it's based on the old concierge type New York buildings where you have the concierge at the bottom making sure that everyone's well and everything runs smoothly, and a really great community feel in the building. So Common Ground in Canberra, like we said, was in Gungahlin, and we work quite closely with the Gungahlin Community Council, who have been fantastic about making sure that that not only was the architecture of the building stellar and beautiful, but also that the tenants and the people and the families living within that tenanted community were welcomed with open arms into Gungahlin. So if you haven't had a chance and you wanted to find out more, you can have a look online at the Common Ground website, just look it up, as well as if you're personally interested in it, I'm more than happy to speak with anyone and give a bit of a very discreet guided tour or have a look at it if any more of the discussions around Common Ground coming to the inner north take place as that eventuates. But I guess, Northside, because we have both early education and care centres, we have community services for people that are facing difficult circumstances, and also all of the facilities that some of the groups hire in and about. If you haven't met with the community service, the Northside team, we also provide support to community groups for whatever reason. So whether that's auspicing smaller groups that are trying to get a project off the ground. So a really good example is Lynham Commons. So the Lynham Commons group is starting the orchard over in Lynham, and just needed to make sure they had an incorporated association that could help them get some of the grant funding to get that up and running, or whether it's sort of lending some very poor social media to the Dixon traders, but getting some more support behind the traders as they invigorate the Dixon shops, or if it's just lending our support to the Majura Men's Shed to make sure that they operate in an environment where they can concentrate on the shed rather than the insurances and things. That's the sort of things that we do. So I'm happy to take any questions, but I just thought it would be a really good opportunity for you to meet one of the Northside team. There's around 160 of us, and we do work with around 1,000 community members across the inner north every single week. So if you ever have anything that you would like to discuss or speak, please come in and have a chat, and I'm happy to take any questions. No?
Just a quick question. I know, I think it was about this time last year that the property group had organised a feasibility and design study, which myself and Mike Hettinger were involved in. Do you know where that's...
Is that with the section 72? Is that...
Well, that was with this particular site, and the proposal at the time was that the Senior Citizens Centre would be relocated from Turner, and that this building would be demolished and rebuilt and designed to allow for the Senior Citizens Centre to be located here?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, no, we haven't heard anything since that meeting about what's happening. So that's right, isn't it? Bruce, my CEO, is here, so just double checking.
Yeah, so you're right, there is a concept design that rebuilds this building and that includes Northside and other tenants, including the Senior Citizens Association and builds a new early childhood education centre. And I think it's just a general modernisation and improvement of the facilities that are here. We've heard nothing since that concept design process has been gone through.
That's a shame.
Yeah, it is a shame.
Yeah. Yeah, so, sorry, I can't give you more information. But yeah, look, if there's anything that Northside can do, we also do have community development support team that is happy to talk and maybe look at helping with unbiased consultations and things, and making sure that opinions and community feedback gets across to various parties. We can discuss that as well. Yes.
I'd like to just express my thanks for the Northside Community Transport Service, who took me for radiation treatment and chemotherapy to Woden, and every day for 5 weeks. And without them, without you, I don't know where I would have been, because I couldn't afford a taxi. I had nobody else, and it's a fantastic service. And I just hope they keep the funding up to it.
Oh, thank you. You wait till the drivers know you said that in front of the boss. Yeah. No, we do universally. The drivers are absolutely.
It's a fantastic.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. I'll definitely feed that back to the team.
So
Yes.
there was a building at the O'Connor Shops that used to have Northside Community Services on the front of it. Do you still have that, or you don't?
When was that? How long ago was that?
I think it was over behind the toilets, wasn't it? Between there and David Street, wasn't it? Yeah.
Is that at O'Connor? No,
Yeah.
it might be before my time. I've been here for 7 years. I don't know of an office.
I
We
think
used to
you're
have
right,
an
yeah.
office at Batham Street, but that's sort of closed down as well. All right, excellent. Well, yeah, my name's Kate. I'm the only Kate at Northside. So if you ever have any questions, you want to have a chat, and if I could be of any help in relation to the business of the Community Council, please give me a call.
So on the agenda now, we had a break for a cup of tea and whatever. If everybody would like one, we do have tea and coffee.
It's pretty rough. But
It's pretty rough, but you can all have a quick break and then we'll get into the next bit of business. Yes. Let's just plug it in just there. There it goes. welcome back.
Yeah,
I hope some of you got a cup of tea or coffee and a biscuit. We will now proceed into the next part, but before I do, I'd just like to acknowledge the presence of Rachel Stephen-Smith, who's our member for Currajong and Minister for a wide variety of things, and a member of the MCCC, and she's attending as a member. But I thought we'd let you know that she's here, and if you want to grab her afterwards and say, don't tell her I said you can. Okay. Next we're going into a bit of a discussion on Section 72, which is where we are at the moment. It is the piece of land that runs basically along Cowper Street at the swimming pool up to, I've forgotten the name of it, the street at the top end. No, along Antle Street up to Horden Street. Thank you. I just remembered it. Which we did go through a number of planning things a couple of years back. Jane will tell you a little bit about that. But what we're trying to do is get in front of where the government is at. You may have noticed that the city plan thing that is coming up, mysteriously, Section 72 was on it and then fell off it. I am not a conspiracy theorist, but I have my conspiracy theories about that, which include the fact that the government just didn't want to know about us and know about it. They don't want any arguments. And who can blame them in some ways? However, it gives us an opportunity to get in front of where they are and what they're doing. There are some proposals for some things, and Kate mentioned common ground. It was actually an election pledge of the Labor team at the last election to put common ground in this area. To the best of my knowledge, that still stands, but I haven't been able to get out of them at this point exactly where they're at with that. It may pop up in this... Sorry?
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. It may pop up in the forthcoming budget. It may not. I don't know. But as soon as we do know, we will be factoring it in. But in the meantime, I'll hand you over to Jane, who'll give you a quick overview of where we've been and where we hope to go.
Okay, so most of you probably know me by now. I ran the Heritage Walks on the weekend of the 6th and 7th of May, and we got over 90 people along to that, which was fantastic. And if anybody wants to find out more about that, I've brought some of the brochures, and I've got the display that we used while we were doing it. So anyway, that's just a bit of background. And what I've done for this tonight is to basically try to give you, sort of context, because Section 72 is actually quite an interesting series of parcels, and the background is important to understand. So bear with me, hopefully you can see over my head. So in terms of background, you can't see any of that?
No, I can see all of it. You're sitting in front of the bottom bits.
I was afraid of
Let's
that.
move to side,
And I'm not quite sure where I
I'll
can
swap sides.
Yeah. You said
That's a
where
possibility. The
Dennis was.
yeah. So quickly, you're looking at obviously all of Canberra was Ngunnawal land, and this particular valley had a series of creek lines. So the reason I'm talking about that is the Sullivan's Creek, the tributary to Sullivan's Creek that we all know and love as the stormwater drain, didn't actually run where that trench was dug. It actually ran through Section 72 and in fact probably beneath this building. So, things have changed. This is a modified landscape. Grazing in fact happened on this land up until pretty much the 1920s. Then it became an airfield. This was the Northbourne Aerodrome. And if anybody's interested, I've got some photos that are circulating. RAF were landing here. in the 20s and even into the 30s after the airport moved over to Duntroon. There was a rabbit plague, not surprisingly I suppose, that happened in the early 1900s. Then the land was resumed by the Commonwealth, conveniently at the prices that were set during the rabbit plague. This land was leased back by Edward Shumack, who in fact lived over next to St Ninians, and used for grazing. The 1918 Walter Burley Griffin modified his original plan and showed this as an industrial area, and in fact in 1915 one of Burley Griffin's drawings shows a small arms factory here coming off a railway spur, because there was in fact supposed to be a gas railway line running parallel to Northbourne Avenue. 1920s I've covered, 1930s of course the Depression, very little happened. Then interestingly 1940, in fact the Dixon Experiment Station that the CSIRO set up operated just across the, well, really, a hop, skip and a jump away from us. From 1940 up until 1964, but in 1959 this land was taken back by the Commonwealth and resumed for suburban development. So 1960 Antill Street was built, and what it did in fact was to cut through part of the old Dixon Experiment Station, forcing the CSIRO to relocate. For interest really, this was the Women's Land Army working in the opium farm, which was not right where we are, but I lose track of where we are in this building. Just over where the Kingdom Hall sits now, would have been where the opium fields were. So that was 1943. Then by 1953, this was the Dixon Experiment Station. That's Ainslie in the distance, with Horden Street. You can see it coming through. And you can see this line of trees is Frensham Street coming down. These trees are still remnant on this Section 72 site. And so Antill Street cut through around here. You can see the old creek actually ran up through, this is Section 72 in here, and ran up and then continued along that way. So
what's in the background, Jane, just to give me some...
The background over there?
Yeah.
That's Ainslie.
Okay.
Yeah. So 1966, the shops were mainly built. They hadn't actually started landscaping. You can see the pool is well and truly in. And in fact, the pool was the very first block that was created in Section 72, which is why it's Block 1. So, yes, these are always fun. And there's the pool. The pool opened in January 1965. Yeah, and it's been an incredibly important community hub ever since. So, obviously it has an important role in terms of recreation and sport, but also in terms of actual community. So, this is actually an excerpt from the master plan for Dixon, which the Dixon master plan doesn't include Section 72, but in the preamble there's discussion of the precinct, and it identifies this as the recreational, community and cultural precinct. And this is the 2016 aerial. It's, I think it covers, yeah, pretty much everything that's in there. So I took that off ACMAPI a couple of days ago. And of course, well, I'll talk some more about what's actually on here. Here are the blocks. So I've gone, using ACMAPI, I've gone and analysed the site areas of all the blocks. There are 16 blocks, of which 2 of these are actually the car park, and one of them is actually just a corner of land. So unfortunately the screen, I don't know if it's possible to twist it, the display slightly.
I'd need to do it up there, but
it doesn't So if I go down this list, well, what you're seeing is that the total developable area on Section 72 is over 85,000 square metres, so it's pretty significant. Dixon Pool takes up 15% of that, and that's basically I've done it by block number. So that's who's here now. There are 16 blocks that it's broken up into, of which 2 are car parking. So that leaves, 2 are car parking. One is the corner next to the pool. You remember block 13 was subject to a DA as part of the Coles Doma application. And block 8 is the landscaped, that's the northwest corner. There we go, the southwest corner. So if you subtract 4, you're down to 12. There are 12 actual land users on separate tenancies in Section 72. Does that make sense? Okay. The planning history. So just running back quickly to 1959, you've got the Sullivan's Creek is realigned by the NCDC. There was basically they created a really long stretch of open space, including the Dixon playing fields on the other side of Horden Street. And this, in fact, was all open space and was basically designed as a sort of a green belt between Dixon and Downer. Then 1983, there's a Metropolitan Policy Plan that the NCDC produced for Section 72, and what that did was to release blocks for new community and club uses. So that's when Anchor, Northside Community Service, Kingdom Hall and Salvation Army were identified as blocks. 2003, Dixon Neighbourhood Plan was produced, which still has statutory effect through both the Commercial Zones Development Code and the Multi-Unit Housing Code, call up the Dixon Neighbourhood Plan. And what the Neighbourhood Plan does is to set out some strategies for this area and also identify it as a community facilities area. 2008, you've got your territory plan, at the time zoning it for leisure and accommodation. So now CZ6 covers the entire Section 72, including the pool. There are public land overlays that sit on top of the pool and the tennis club, but CZ6 is the zone. That's important, it's a commercial zone. Of course, there was the Downer Club fire, which has left block 25 vacant, and 2014, of course, there was the DA by Coles for the temporary car park, and that was refused last year.
Block 13, which is block 13 exactly?
Block 13 is the northwest corner, and that's the one with over 50 established trees. Okay, so the planning controls that apply now, you've got the CZ6 zone objectives and development table. What they do is to prohibit residential use. The only way the Common Ground project or any other housing project is capable of being approved on Section 72 is if the zoning is changed. And there are various ways in which you can change the zoning, but they have to be done through a territory plan variation process. And we have not yet seen any draft territory plan variation.
There was the attempt through the omnibus, that's that one time, which was rejected in and around when we did the tree.
It was pulled out of the omnibus, and we never actually got a text.
Yeah.
So there was never actually anything to get your teeth into. It's covered by the Commercial Zones Development Code because it's a commercial zone, and the Commercial Zone Development Code has a number of requirements, but when I say requirements, let's face it, they're pretty loose. There is a 2-storey height limit. However, in many ways that may not be appropriate if multi-unit housing goes onto this land, and so that may need to be changed. And there is a maximum plot ratio, and again, that may not be appropriate. That might need to be increased. So nothing's basically set in stone, let's face it. The Dixon Neighbourhood Plan does still have statutory effect, and any application that comes through is going to have to be justified in terms of how it meets the code that's there. It's It's not covered, as I said, by the Dixon Master Plan, which basically drew a boundary that stops at Cowper Street. So the master plan doesn't help with this. And it doesn't fall under the control of the new Urban Renewal Authority, which may or may not have a design review panel. Anyway, it is likely to attract merit track assessment, and any proposal in Section 72 is likely to fall into the merit track. However, there could be impacts if this land were developed in a way that, well, let's face it, any development here is likely to have impacts, and it's not clear that they would actually attract the scrutiny that might lead to them being mitigated. Okay, so the CZ6 zone objectives, look, for most people this is boring as hell, but for town planners, this is absolutely you know, where things are made or broken. So this is what any development on Section 72 is supposed to comply with, and if it doesn't, there are strong grounds for overturning that decision in ACAT if necessary, but obviously what's desirable is that it actually does comply in the first place. I won't spend a lot of time on that. What I want to really talk about...
Sorry, Jane, that did mention accommodation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was
You
asking.
mentioned accommodation there.
Oh, sorry?
That's not
Oh,
It
yeah.
talks about accommodation as leisure and accommodation, and what it's talking about is hotels.
Oh, okay.
Hotels, service departments. This was basically designated as being about entertainment, accommodation and leisure. The idea being, you probably remember in 1959, the first motel on the corner of Northbourne and Anthill Streets.
Yeah, I stayed there a few times.
Yeah, this was regarded as the gateway, and therefore it was necessary to put in tourism accommodation. Yes.
Does Northside Community Services satisfy that zone?
Oh, as community, absolutely. Yeah, community services. So, look, this is not a comprehensive. You know, I wrote this on Saturday, so it's done quickly. But the factors to consider in terms of moving things forward, because let's face it, things have stalled. You know, we were talking about this back in 2014, 2015. Everything went silent, and there hasn't been a peep about anything further happening on Section 72 since then. So
I think you scared them, Tom.
well, okay. There really isn't a master plan for this area, and that's a problem. There needs to be a master plan if this is actually going to be integrated and you know, made to deliver real benefits. At the moment, the hodgepodge is a problem. It's a problem in terms of vandalism and safety. You know, for even just the tenants who are working here during the day, it's definitely a problem at night. In terms of, you know, achieving the object of the territory plan, you need a master plan if you're actually going to stage development in some sensible sort of way. And the truth is that there are changing demographics all around us, so a master plan is a really good way of making sure that that's looked at properly. There are social impacts. If this has basically been a land bank, and you know, people have dipped into that land bank over time and taken out blocks for different things. And the truth is, eventually you run out. The whole point, though, in taking such a large land bank is that you have enough to cover the needs for, you know, maybe 50 to 100 years. Well, let's face it, we've taken out 50, and now we've got another 50 that we're going to need to be catering for community needs, at least for another 50. Let's hope that there are people still alive in Australia after that. So population density is going to grow. That means you're going to have more demand for community services, not less. So the community facility opportunities that this land provides are really important to handle wisely. There really has been a failure, I would say, on the part of the LDA in the past to acknowledge the concerns that were raised at the two large, well-attended workshops that were organised during 2014, and that was really very disappointing. The truth is that, you know, if things are going to move forward, that has to be acknowledged and rectified, because there were a lot of people who were quite aggrieved in the process of having wasted their time and then not being heard. There really is an opportunity here, if this is done well, to demonstrate an integrated community arts, recreation, tourism, cultural hub on Section 72. You know, you need a master plan to make it work, but you know, the land is here, and if people are willing to engage, you know, there is an opportunity for an aged person's housing component as part of Section 72 that showcases all sorts of valuable, sustainable living things. The pines, I don't want to forget that the heritage listed trees on the old Dixon Experiment Station in Downer have now been slated for removal because they've apparently reached the end of their useful life. If the pines are being pulled out over in Downer in the near future, the reality is that the pines that screen the residential area of Dixon from Section 72 are likely to be taken out as well, and probably for safety reasons. So there needs to be some consideration to the possibility that those might be removed, which would take out the existing buffer, and obviously replanting would be necessary. This is just a wish list. So at the end of the workshops that we attended back in 2014, you probably all know I do the Dixonia Magnifica on Facebook, and I threw this up as a, you know, one possibility. You know, you might put a park up here. You might put an eco-housing demonstration over here. You might do something to actually create an open space network along Sullivan's Creek that functions in delivering a lot of other benefits. And you might, you know, actually make this into an integrated hub. But you've got to talk to people, and you've got to actually listen. So that's all for me. I have got to leave in 15 to 20 minutes. But you know, I really wanted us to have a chance to talk about what could happen here, because the Common Ground project is likely to require a draft variation if it is going to go ahead. And what I'm worried about is the approach all along to Section 72 has been piecemeal. And it's, you know, here's an opportunity, there's a bit of vacant land, a fire happens, suddenly there's some more vacant land.
Suddenly there's a fire.
Well, so, you know, really, this is the natural capital. We should be managing this. And the planning that's needed to pull it together seems to be missing a lot. So I'd like to make sure that we're actually on the front foot and designing so that we actually get the outcome we want.
So Jane, from those early meetings back in 2014, when it was on the front foot and it looked like something was going to happen, why has it gone quiet? What's the real story of why it's gone quiet?
I don't know if
is it
anybody
just too
else.
hard to handle for the government?
If anybody else lives in Dixon, you would have received one of these flyers. That's the last we heard.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't understand the way things are done.
The previous development, all of those workshops, that was all driven by housing. So the real answer is because we had a number of strategic meetings from an NCCC point of view with housing, right? And the reality was that their fundamental view was, unless something underpins the revenue it takes to redevelop that land, that the government could get some return out of, they're not interested in developing the community aspect of it. So what actually happened was, what was driving it at the time were about 200 housing units, right, driven by housing's need to accommodate low-income earners and underprivileged throughout Canberra, and they saw that as an opportunity to take the whole precinct and divide it up between what they classified as what they would do for the community and what they wanted to get out of it. The problem was there were 2 workshops, 100 and something people put input into those workshops. All the ideas were listed, and the architects that were employed by housing dropped back on the table a set of drawings that you'd be living on Mars. It was just a complete different, what they drew were 8-storey buildings, and to hide the impact of those buildings was a row of trees and a path that takes that bottom corner where Jane's drawn that row of trees, right? What they were giving back to community was a couple of paths and the rest of it was going to be buildings. And so it was such a major departure from the 2 workshops that the way the conversations went was, you've got to be kidding. And they went into this kind of it's all too hard basket, and then the whole thing went completely quiet. So the fight that you're always going to have is to do anything that turns that into anything cultural. There has to be some sort of trade-off where the government will underpin the development of the community aspect with a return for the government. Now, at the time, it was 200 and something apartments. Now, that could be scaled back, but you would have to enter into a conversation with the government to work that forward. At the moment, it's gone back into the too hard basket and kind of like disappeared off the page. Is kind of roughly where things are at.
There was one more development, that was our famous mid-2015 meeting, about the right year.
Yeah.
Where, through Jane, we asked and asked and asked for meetings to find out what's happening. And suddenly at the last minute there was a meeting, and about half a dozen of us, maybe a few more, went along to a meeting, and that was the infamous meeting where we went along and tried to put more ideas back on the table, and they were sort of talking it through, and then we all went home and we discovered as we left the room a button was pressed somewhere, and a media release appeared. Because I was sent the media release, and it must have arrived in the time it took me to walk home.
Yes, and the headline was Dixon Development Gets Nod.
Yes.
Yeah. That was at the very, very, very end, right? There were meetings before that. What I'm saying is the reason.
No, there were no meetings before that.
Yes,
the meeting that Jane had run.
I was at them.
This particular meeting.
I was at that. And I'm just saying, I was at the meetings before and I was at that meeting. What you said happened, but I'm saying housing drove a series of meetings.
No, I understood all that. I'm just saying that in the process there was one more thing.
Can the common ground proposal that Jane is putting forward meet that requirement?
Yeah, that's the problem. See, what I'm saying is what Jane wants to put forward makes sense, but there will always be some form of trade-off, because the one comment that housing made, because they're underpinning it all.
But doesn't the common ground, isn't that housing?
It's what it turns into in terms of value to them. So it's a question of how many whatevers can you put down on that site and deliver a return for government to pay for whatever else.
I get that.
Yeah, and that's it.
Is it possible or not possible?
Well, what I'm concerned about is if it becomes a standalone project. If it doesn't actually integrate with everything else that's in Section 72 and with its surroundings, then you end up having an enclave.
Well, that's the only thing they could possibly design.
The other big fear is if they pick it off in pieces.
Yes.
Right.
That's right. Where you end up with
common ground. Obviously, it's not a requirement.
That's right. And the truth is, if I go back to the aerial, there we go. There's now a lot of land in here. So this Salvation Army site is
Empty.
actually, it's
Yeah.
empty. It's been
Fire.
left and vandalised, and then
Waiting to be
about 3
burnt
weeks
down.
ago, somebody set fire
To it.
to it, not surprisingly.
And we're not suspicious about that.
No, so you've got the Downer Club site, you know, with the Salvation Army site, which clearly has the capacity for, you know, some sort of a driveway access off Anthill Street potentially. You know, in terms of redevelopment, the reality is that's a lot of land, and the LDA controls certainly blocks 25 and block 6, and I think has either already secured or is about to secure block 22.
I understand that negotiations on the government getting this land are currently underway. They haven't actually been finalised. I don't know what if any sticking points there are.
I mean, it's really a shame that this building has, you know, been burnt, because in fact it was potentially the sort of building that you would use as a community centre.
The fundamental thing is, if you lead with the front foot and you want to do something with this, if you propose something to government where you could actually start a conversation, and it wasn't that what housing did wrong simply was what was talked about wasn't even entertained. What you've got to do is actually have a genuine conversation, because if those ideas had actually been addressed by housing, I think you'd have half a project going, right? It's just, there was just this kind of complete disconnect between the workshops and what they wanted to build. And there's an opportunity, because it's all in the too hard basket at the moment, there's an opportunity to put forward solutions for this and open up dialogue with the government to maybe do something with it constructively. That does exist. You know, it depends on who wants to put the time in to actually make that happen. But that's where Jane's concerned, because if it's left alone, it'll eventually get picked off in pieces, and you know.
Well, it's also because, you know, if we end up having to react yet again, you know, the reacting just, you don't actually get to frame the conversation.
So Paul, you've had
I just want to put any past housing options aside. I want to put common ground out of the picture for the moment. And I want to pick up what Jane is proposing there. And I'm going to ask through the NCCC, is that something we can take to government and say, how about a master plan?
Yes.
Just put all the other stuff out. Just don't go in, because all that comes in once you start master planning. But we seem to be operating already accepting that there's going to be this and there's going to be that. I'd rather say, let's go in, open the table up yet again and say, how do we go about master
This will be a
plan?
master plan with no hope of being able to achieve it, because there's no revenue possibility.
No, what he's saying is you can bring that in.
That's not how you do master planning. Master plan isn't built on, is the money out there or not? Master planning is about putting all your ideas in and coming up with.
Well, master plan that ends up nowhere, right? Yeah, but
the problem with the master plan is, if my understanding is correct, we are coming towards the end of the master planning processes, and there is no money for extra master plans.
Would that be the end of the LDA master plan processes?
Okay.
But we know that we have a new authority to deal with. Can't we put it on the table? This is a priority that this community group is looking for.
Yeah, we could put it on the table, but I think it would go nowhere fast.
I think, if I can build on what Dennis said, that there is a consciousness in government that there are a lot of master plans that have been done for which the resources are not available to actually implement the public realm elements of the master plan.
Yeah.
So the process raises community expectations, get people to do a lot of work, and then there's no funding to actually deliver on that. So I think
For you, I'd like to respond to that, because what happens then is that the ad hocness continues.
They sell off a bit to some
So
developer.
I would actually ask again, I think this is something that this community, we should be asking for it. Whether they want to think about it or not, I think we need to ask for it.
We've just been going, last few weeks, we've been going to master planning sessions for Hague Park.
Which is the second time we've
Yeah.
had a draft
It
master
is, yeah.
plan in 2012.
Yeah, 6 years ago, yeah. But the possibility of all these things happening in Hague Park, it could well be another master plan that just gets put on the shelf. There's been a lot of engagement though.
Can I just clarify? I'm not suggesting don't ask for it. If you want to ask for it, and I'm all in favour of master plans. I've got study background in community planning and real estate development. I absolutely agree with you. You know, if it's going to be ad hoc, if it's not planned. But I'm just saying, with that consciousness that there are a lot of master plans out there that haven't been implemented, and there is a consciousness of government about that expectation raising. I think they're very serious about Hague Park.
We are sitting on the last community site in this part of the suburbs. We aren't seen to move and say, look, let's take this seriously and stop your ad hoc approach. Well, you're actually signalling the other.
It's
Keep going with the ad hoc approach. So I reckon
Okay, no, I hear what you're saying.
this is
I
it.
just wanted to tell
Once
you
this is
that,
gone, it's gone.
yeah, totally. But
It's been eaten away slowly, so
yeah, the master.
if it's not
We
master-
can ask for a master plan. How much luck we'll have of getting one, I honestly don't know. But
I've
what
never
we
heard so many people back away from an idea before you even put the idea forward.
No, it's not that. It's a question of how to frame it. I mean, the reality is this, and that's where the premise of what you suggest, right, is probably something that's going to just fall into the cracks. There were previous ideas and concepts by the government wanting to utilise that land. What you really want to do is sit down there and say, what part of that can be revitalised to a point where there is an incentive for government to look at redeveloping that land to deliver aspects of what Jane's talking about. In that setting, you could get a hybrid of what they were trying to achieve before, and then get in effect the result that you get with the master plan. But what I'm saying is, having sat through several meetings, unless there is a champion within the government wanting to underpin this with something that actually brings the return back into the community by some other means, albeit housing, there is no one that'll champion this, because no one will pay for it. And so it'll stay a kind of like disjointed piece of rubbish, right? And if you want to get it up, you're much better off engaging the government in terms of, look, what with the remnants of what you wanted to achieve before, what can you rescue out of that to turn this into something better? And it was an overdeveloped proposal the last time, but there would be still interest in meeting the community halfway in having that discussion. But if you start off just simply on a master planning level, it'll go nowhere, is my personal opinion, because I've just sat through too many meetings on it.
You're down the back.
Would an aged housing provide enough revenue and still retain a community hub, that the feel of what's supposed to be there? Because it seems to be that one of the best revenue earners I've ever seen is aged housing.
If I were to pick somewhere,
Any
I'd probably
doubt at
put
all?
some aged housing in this sort
Well,
of
number
area.
25, number 25 on there has been talked about forever.
Yeah.
Ever since the fire.
From what has been done before, and from what you realise that all of you have said, you have to put revenue with this, right? Then you must have some concepts of what that means. I know you did originally state there was one, but what realistically can be done that would be in sympathy with these concepts.
You're thinking
And
of
I
the
only
right
say that because I'm an accountant and I understand this money thing. You know, I get this, we like
You're
money.
one of the few.
Okay. No, I just like money because that's what accountants do. And I get the idea that it's got to pay for itself, but also looking at the demographics of this area, the ageing, and Goodwin's booked out, so is the one down in Few I know in different areas, and I've got to find somewhere to live, okay? I'm not that far away from that, so I'm just setting myself up. Okay? So I'm thinking the best thing would be compromise, and maybe in the master plan that we come up with, to get government on board to saying, okay, what is there a need for that is also a revenue earner, that is actually needed by the community of this community. And I see no reason why the age thing, because we don't want to go to Queensland anymore.
Just very quickly, in response to that, in all those 2014 planning, there was no big push against age on this property. In fact, why I keep saying putting it 25 there is that's the one that everyone kept pointing at. Why can't that corner be the whole aged care thing? There was no big pushback against it. I'm not saying it was in, but I'm just saying it was constantly.
That may be the possibility here. A little bit of homework to see what age things are being available, and is there the scope and need for it, and maybe push that one before some other area grabs it.
And I take this right back to
make this happen that way.
I take this right back to a conversation I was present with John Stanhope, and they were then talking about, and that's the site then that they were talking about.
Well,
that site's been on the radar for a long time.
That's heading in the right direction. It's heading in the direction of what would make them listen to have a holistic conversation. And that's I guess
hang on, my point being, it has been made.
Yes, but let's develop it.
Yeah,
but it hasn't been
but
developed,
again,
it's not on
but again,
that
but again, I would argue what Jane has just argued, that may be a given amongst the community, but let's get the planning going so it's actually part of the holistic plan.
This is actually an incredibly important
historic
land use. Yeah. There is no heritage listing that protects it.
Can we get that?
As we know, your lease comes up to be renewed periodically.
Next year, yeah.
So, we want to be able to keep the Dixon Aquatic Centre operating.
And if possible, expand it. I mean, I'd love to see an indoor pool adjacent to it or something.
And, there's potentially scope for
that was us old age people when you're building them a home there, I do need that.
I thought the pool could make a car park.
I've operated the pool for 20 years, so I've been around a long time in this area. And we put to government about 2003, 2004 about the feasibility of an indoor pool on this site. Obviously the pool sits dormant for a long time because it's absolute, when you talk about recovery of money, there's just no money in outdoor pools in this town outside about 4.5 months. An indoor pool would really make the site valuable 12 months of the year round. I could see a lot of people would look at that site and see it's vacant for 7.5 months of the year and go, what value is that site to us? So, I've always had the feeling that the developers would be circling for many years, and now the time has come that they're circling. So in terms of, at the moment, the change rooms are getting refurbed, and the government has put some money into the facility in that time, but I don't know whether government departments actually talk to one another on what's actually happening.
I don't know about how viable it is. What about a retractable dome or solar? I don't know how much this costs.
And you want an indoor 25-metre pool. In terms of the running costs of those are far less than, I know people look at the civic pool experiment, they put a dome and all that, and we used to take it off and whatever. It's cost prohibitive, running costs are exorbitantly high, and just talking here, the government needs a return, and they don't have that money to continually fund these projects. But you could make a self-sustainable facility built right on that facility, and then the outdoor pool would open for the summer and keep that long heritage it's had with it. Not necessarily, but it's got as I said, the site sits there for a long time and it is vacant, and it breaks my heart, but I can't run it any longer than what I do because it's
this is just you know, throwing an idea out there, but I mean, in theory, and let's face it, there's nowhere near enough car parking in here in the summer, and you know, already it's used an enormous amount as free parking for the shops. But if, in theory, if you actually had a large building with a lot of basement parking that made it possible for people to get to the pool, and you put a large building, you know, where this car park is now, it would not overshadow, it could not overshadow the pool.
Not that location, no.
And it's true that, you know, if this were large, it would potentially overshadow some of the houses that are over here on Demarest Street.
You're going to have to go up, like, what are they talking about in Northbourne, 80 feet, so in the old thing, so if you go up 80 feet, you're going to have a huge shadow. You don't have to do that.
I think you won't solve this thing in one conversation, but there does exist an opportunity from a council point of view to put forward the fact that you want to strategically look at the whole of that site rather than have it turn into bits and pieces.
Which is what it is.
And the thing is, you can be part of that conversation, especially with the pool, and actually entertain government, because at the moment it's in a too hard basket. That's where it currently says, right? And if the Inner North Council decided to champion turning that into not being in a too hard basket, but actually reasonable development for the whole site, I think it's the right time to do it, because every other time you're in reaction mode to something that's going on. You could easily take this on the front foot in with a discussion, right? But it has to be a combo of ideas that actually develop a return, and that's where the aged care works, because it's part and parcel of that. So it's a mixture of aged care and housing. You got half a chance, because
I think it's perfect.
10 years, then I need it, okay?
There's something like the Ainsley Old, the ones near the Ainsley Football Club. It's very close to the district centre, so that people.
This presents a better opportunity than Hay Park, because Hay Park's got other problems with trees and siding. This is a clean site to actually play with. They've just made it too hard because. And the problem is, the two public meetings are so different to what they wanted. It just, no one managed that process through the outcome.
Have you got better fingernails?
So, yeah, Joe.
So, I guess this part of the conversation started at the Common Ground. As Dennis said, it was an announcement at Common Ground. This would be a proposed site for Common Ground, and as Jane said, that would require a change in the zoning of the site. So that's a perfect starting point for you to have this conversation. Say, well, you propose this, you want Common Ground here, it's going to require a change in zoning. How about we have a whole look at the whole site? That's your way in, from my perspective, I think, to say to government, well, actually, it's part of your plan, and we need help.
So who are we going to talk about as the person to lead that process?
It's another meeting, I think.
And the thing is, Jane's done a lot of work in and around it, but it's that kind of look at the NCCC to try and just champion that in and report back to the community about what the discussion looks like. Because if you drive it, you've got half a chance.
I will just throw in at this stage, although we have no official word from planning, we do have indications that they would be amenable to hearing from us. That's the politest way I can put it.
Us, the citizens. Sorry, my daughter finished choir in 5 minutes and I've got to run.
Yes, without giving away a few secrets, we have had some discussions and it looks promising. So it is a good time. I don't know where we take it from here. Has anybody got any suggestions? Do I form a working party? Do I do something or?
Yes, I think you've got a few people here who have the background and knowledge and skill sets already to put a working group together quite easily. Ladies run out the door there, and a couple of you people with the kind of background and experience, and without any doubt at all, it's all the pre-knowledge is there, and then just need a little bit more gathering looks as if it's needed.
Consultation, okay.
I can't believe that you can't do this relatively quickly, actually, with the kind of background knowledge I've got tonight.
Sure.
It's worth having a shot, Dennis.
Yeah, I feel that too, but I just want to know if anybody has any thoughts in the directions we should take this, or you know what we should do. I don't want to walk in one sense. I don't want to walk out of here saying, "Well, that was great, we had it," but what have we decided to do?
A master plan.
A master plan. To ask for a master plan.
Why don't you call for a working group for that?
Call for interested people in a working group.
Okay, right, so I now made...
In the next very short time, so that you can make that happen.
Yeah.
And before the city, it's under city renewal, isn't it, the new entity?
No,
it
fell off. It fell off the city renewal, which gives us a different advantage.
But I think the advice on how to take it forward is actually sensible. You've got to find a window to throw that back on the table.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like it's call for people with and look for these particular skills.
You interested, Paul?
Background.
No, but Jane gets put forward for a lot of things, so I don't wish to overload her, although we will.
She's the one who brought it up.
Yes.
Yeah, well, it's obviously a tech one. I mean, I think it would be very disappointing if she wasn't on that.
Yeah, sure.
With some of the other people who have obviously got a great deal of knowledge about I don't actually have any background in this.
No, but you have a very important background.
No, I just look, I can't get into Goodwin, and I'm not going out to wherever land.
Yeah.
I want to be here, and I need somewhere to live. I'm completely selfish about this.
Yes, but you do have an important skill, which is accountancy, which we may need some thinking on. So have a thought about that, because in fact I think, as Greg pointed out, it does come down to dollars in the government's pocket. No, sorry Andrew, that was unfair.
He wants the apartment on the top floor with the big huge
Well, hey, now you're thinking, Andrew, do we have a plan for you? Your retirement, look at it.
That's it, exactly. I have to move fast down the road.
I'll have a word to Jane, just around the corner. Maybe through her, back through you, you could put out a call for anybody who'd like to go on a working party.
Yeah.
If Jane said yes.
Yeah, it's all right, I'll be talking with Jane quite extensively. I mean, Jane, Greg and I started this some time back through various things, so yeah, we've been in touch.
The government's recession is just going to be done correctly.
Yeah, and that's part of what I was concerned about. And I don't know what we do with all the rest of it, but there are some important things. For example, does the tennis club need a new tennis? Do they need a clubhouse? I don't know.
We're pretty right, thanks.
Right, thanks. But it's not a question that has been asked, and that's the point.
Gold taps in the bathroom would be nice.
Right. And we know what the swimming pool needs. It needs an indoor pool. How we get that, I don't know, but I think we've got to give it a shot, one way or the other. Okay, that's sort of about it, I think, unless anybody has anything really burning to say about this. No? Okay, thank you very much. We will probably quickly wind up with some reports and things, but if you want to hold, please. And thank you everybody who came along, although the majority of people were.
Are you moving into committee meetings?
Yeah, we'll quickly move into a committee meeting, but not long.
Should we stop
Kill that, yeah.